Okay, so the perfect segue. How are they doing it, having to use a GPS or a wearable device, and you're doing it through video?
Well, okay, so I don't want to get too much into the secret sauce, of course,
Sure.
but you can imagine that computer vision right now it's called, like it's like the golden age of artificial intelligence, computer vision, and really these fields that were mostly academic and at the cusp of taking off, and have now hit a critical mass point where anybody could walk in, not necessarily with no code tools, but anybody can walk in, learn the landscape pretty quickly, and then develop actual deployable, tools and metrics, right? And so I say all that to say that when GPS systems started becoming adopted for athlete management or athlete performance and analysis, it was really at the beginning of the last decade, right? The 2010s and the mid 2010s is when that took off. The kind of computer vision that we use to analyze and pull the same metrics didn't really develop until the end of the last decade. There's a phenomenal company out of Canada called Sports Logic, and they do very similar to exactly what we do, except for they are targeting more so the highest levels. They're massive in hockey, right? And it's all computer vision based. They started in 2015, but their traction and everything, they didn't take off and solidify themselves until around 2019-ish, 2018 to 2020 timeframe, right? And the reason why is because they actually went out, and if you look at their website, they publicize this a lot. They went out and hired a bunch of PhDs from academia to drive the industry's technology forward to get to a point where they could do this kind of stuff from video. We were able to come in at a time where a lot of that legwork had been done. And now it's a question about learning the tools, learning how to apply them, and then really figuring out the best way to apply them. And so that's where we step in. So the NFL is, in summary to your question, at NFL and collegiate levels, they use tracking data, and so do we. The difference is they use the old school method of just putting a tracker on each guy, managing a very complex and expensive hardware system, and dealing with those upgrades and failures year after year. And we just take the simple approach of give us some video, and we can identify people all over the field and track them that way, and then pull all the data that we need.
Wow, that's super cool. So this data that you're pulling, you said it could be used two different ways: for scouting purposes and evaluating athletes, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And then number two
Yes.
was safety. So when I think of safety, and like growing up as a football player and working in Detroit and visiting that company we talked about offline, Zenith, I'm
Yeah.
thinking more like, we're making helmets with better padding, or there's certain devices in there to measure, like, if they got a head injury or whatnot. But it seems like with you, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, or go more in depth in
Mm-hmm.
this, when a video is recording a practice or something and you're pulling data on an individual, are you talking about safety prevention in that you're proactively able to tell when you need to, like, slow an athlete down or take them out of the game because you can tell that if they keep playing at this high level for the next 10 minutes, they're going to injure themselves?
So two things,
Yeah.
I guess three things. The first one would be that for the concussion issue itself, I guess what I would say is there is no consensus on what the number of head contacts, like the limitation of volume that you can take on your head in terms of head contacts and hits, and what we call subconcussive blows, and the magnitude of a concussive blow. Because if you look at all the studies that have been done in concussions, there are a couple very strong theories, but then every 3 to 5 years, a new study comes out that contradicts what the previously held belief was in
Oh,
terms of
wow.
volume. And so I don't claim that we have a system that can analyze and detect concussive blows, nor, because only a doctor can diagnose a concussion, nor do we have a system that right now has been proven to identify that red line volume for concussive or subconcussive blows, just because that scientific research hasn't been done. One of our interests is someday to partner with some kind of academic institution and afford them our tool, because our tool is the best at collecting large amounts of data to figure out the actual answers there. The second thing I'd like to point out is that we did not invent the wheel in terms of this athlete management or the sports performance aspects of these metrics, right? We really are just approaching it from making them universally accessible. So the reason I say that is because right now with the GPS systems, what part of the reason they are used, and particularly in basketball, part of the reason why they were adopted in that sport as an example, is because it was very clear and very provable early on that if you tracked how much volume the athletes were running through, right, and what the actual magnitude of that volume was, right? So to put it simply, like how many times did you sprint and for how far this week, you could track trends in injuries, soft tissue injuries, particularly, so like pulled hamstrings, etc. And you could also track trends in performance. And so it turns out that a system that gives you that kind of data on your athletes can tell you two things. A, we need to watch these guys or these girls because they're at risk of exceeding the volume that's going to put them in danger of an injury. So don't run them too hard in practice because they want to be able to perform in the game, and you're going to hurt them in practice. And there's plenty of injuries that happen in practice. And B, we can actually tell you from the trends in their performance in practice which days need to be easier and which days need to be harder, so that you peak each week during your performance, right? So it's revolutionizing. So football, for an example, in terms of a practice week, typically in high school, you would have a Monday practice. I mean, I get my high school and college football confused. It's been a while, and I've taken a lot of hits myself. Part of the reason why I was interested in this. Typically in a high school week, you'd have a Monday practice that was a decent speed, intensive. Tuesday was your very heavy day, and that seems to be universal across football, I think, except in the NFL after Monday Night Football games. But so Tuesday was your heavy hitting day, full pads, lots of volume, maybe a 3-hour practice, etc. Wednesday was like a step down from Tuesday, but still very hard. Thursday was typically closer to a walkthrough, and you maybe didn't do much at all, if anything. And this for high school. And then Friday is a game, right? So you have difficult practice, most difficult practice, walkthrough, so next to nothing, and then a game. I don't know. I'm not an expert in sports performance. We have advisors. We're putting together a pretty strong board of advisors that I'm excited about. But we have advisors, mentors, and experts in the field that we know that we defer to for this kind of expertise. But what I do know is that during my experience as an athlete, one of the things I learned that had been, the theory that had been developed through using athlete management systems like this was that the Thursday practice where you don't do anything and then your Friday game was a bad combination.
Ooh.
The last thing you wanted to do, we were told, was to have your athletes do next to nothing in terms of volume and output, and then try to come in for a game or a match or whatever and go at 100%. And so we used to do something in college called Fast Friday, because games are on Saturdays, where instead of just walking through on Friday or just sitting around in a hotel room all day or not doing anything, we would actually run a pretty decent amount and output at around what we would call 60-70%, which doesn't seem intuitive because it's like, whoa, it's the day before the game, don't you guys want to rest? But activating your muscles and performing at that level kind of warmed you up in advance for the game, and the next day you perform better, versus taking the Friday off and then doing that fast equivalent of a lighter practice on the Thursday, right? So it shifts how your practices are done. It shifts how you manage your athletes, how you train them, and how you watch out for injuries. And again, we didn't invent that, but we're just trying to offer the ability to do that and take your performance to the next level to as many teams as possible.
Gotcha. Well, now that you've broken it down, I can totally see and that schedule, by the way, breakdown of high school practice, dead on. That's how we did it. So nice.
Okay. So I'm not too washed up yet. I still remember what we used to do.
Yeah, of course. So I know our coaches would eat that up, for example. I also grew up in Texas. So like, I know that, certain high schools for sure would love this types of tools.
Right.
So I'm going back to